All right, so thank you for attending our sustainability panel. This is co-hosted by the Channels program as well as the Career and Community Engagement Center. And my name is Jessica Fox-Wilson. I'm the Director of Career Development. And we have three panelists today who work in three different areas of sustainability. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves first. So if you all could tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you're doing now. And why don't we go ahead and start with Amy?
Hi, my name is Amy Riegel, and I work for a city in Minnesota called the City of Plymouth. It's the 7th biggest city in Minnesota, and I work in water resources. So I work with both stormwater and surface water resources, so our lakes, streams, wetlands. So that's a little taste of what I do.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy. Brenda, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm the Executive Director at Welty Environmental Center. Welty is here in Beloit, located at Big Hill Park. Our focus is environmental education primarily, so we don't do so much like land management projects or conservation, although it's part of our mission. But what we really focus on is education itself. As Executive Director, my main role is to kind of keep all the moving parts moving and provide support, the background support, to allow the program staff to do what they do, which is the education piece of our work.
Okay, great. And Erin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Erin Wilson, and I am the Programming Director for the Welty Environmental Center. Primarily what, well, I wear a lot of hats, but primarily the one that I like to wear most often is working with kids when we bring out school groups to do field trips. We partner pretty heavily with the local schools, bringing them out for field trips. We also work with the schools in their after-school programming, bringing them environmental education. The more hands-on, the better. I truly believe that if we can get kids' hands dirty and have a little bit of fun around science, that the concepts stick a little bit better.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So all of you come from really different backgrounds. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your career trajectory. So where did you start and how did you get to where you are today? So why don't we start this time with Brenda? So Brenda, if you want to tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, please.
I believe my career trajectory is a shape described as a spiral. I have done a lot of different things over the past, I suppose, 30 years since I started call it my first undergraduate experience through till now. I actually started as an art history major back in the late 80s at the University of Iowa, and from there went for a master's in art history and was totally planning to be a professor, but sort of came to the realization that I was not interested in focusing my energies that specifically. I'd moved to Austin. I was working at a fabric store and had my interest peaked in one of our customers who was a local costume designer. So I actually went back to school and got an MFA in costume design from the University of Texas. And then from there for the next 10 years, worked in Los Angeles and Washington, DC in a variety of costume shops, film, theater, and a little bit of time in the movies at Los Angeles. Concurrent with that, I had a partner who is now my husband, who is also a geology professor at Beloit College. In the early 2000s, he was offered a job at the college, and we were in Washington, DC at that time. In our mid-30s, starting to think it was maybe time to start thinking about starting a family. We were both from the Midwest, so we moved back to Beloit in the early 2000s. And at that point, I actually stayed home for 5 years. I had my 2 sons. I was teaching yoga. As the oldest one started into kindergarten, I realized that now was time to start thinking about the next chapter. And so I actually went back to Beloit as a non-trad student studying biology. And I thought at first maybe I was going to be a biology teacher at the high school. And so I also was working on an education track, but realized that my heart really lay more with the hard science. And I knew I was not going to be up for all of the paperwork and the nonsense that teachers have to deal with beyond being able to work with the kids. So I stayed focused on science. When I graduated in 2000, 2014, I went and worked at Carry Ingredients, a local company in Beloit, working in the regulatory department, which is focused on nutrition and labeling and things like that. I was also on the board at Welty, and as I continued working in the corporate world, and that was really my first foray into that sector, I realized that really wasn't my best place to be. We had jobs opening up at Welty. I decided to go off the board, join the staff at Welty, and here I am now with a really interesting combination, being asked to do a really interesting combination of things that kind of uses all of that stuff. I know there's a later question about it, but again, total spiral. Like nothing was an obvious link to the next link.
Awesome. Well, I actually think that that sort of spiral is really typical of liberal arts practitioners. So it's a good example of ways that your major may not dictate the types of things that you end up going into. Amy, let's switch to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory?
Yeah, it's been a little bit more linear. I graduated Beloit in 2014, and I majored in geology with minors in physics and environmental studies. It was actually the first term that environmental studies was offered as a minor, and I was able to add it to my title when I was in my final semester there, so that was exciting. But after I graduated, I spent a year working for an environmental consulting firm, a national corporate environmental consulting firm, and it gave me a lot of wonderful experiences. I was working on different types of projects every week. I was traveling all around the Midwest. It gave me a lot of hands-on knowledge, kind of just thrown in there, learning on the fly, and that was really great. But after a year, I realized it really wasn't for me. It wasn't the best type of environment. I didn't enjoy traveling 60% of the time, and I started looking for a job with government. So I actually accepted a position with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which is basically the state of Minnesota's EPA, if you will. And I worked for 3.5 years in their stormwater permitting unit. So I worked mostly with construction sites, but also with municipalities on issuing stormwater permits, inspecting construction sites, and auditing city stormwater programs. And so I worked in regulatory compliance and enforcement, and I really enjoyed it, but I got a little burnt out at the state level. Everything was so high level. I didn't really feel like the work I was doing was impacting folks directly. So I started looking for jobs with municipalities, and that's when I found this position with the city of Plymouth. So I'm one of 2 staff members with the city who manages water resources. And about 1/4 of our city is covered in water in some way, shape, or form. Our largest lake is Medicine Lake, and we have 7 other lakes in our city. And then we have over 800 wetlands. So we have a lot of water resources to manage. So it's a really fun job. I love the diversity in work I'm doing. I, again, get to do different things every day. Things just pop up, and I really enjoy that type of work environment.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And Erin, could you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory?
Okay, sure. Well, like Brenda's, mine was not completely linear, but to keep a very long circular story fairly short, after moving to Minneapolis, I earned a master's in fine arts and creative writing. At Beloit College, I studied creative writing and rhetoric and discourse. So I got my bachelor's in creative writing and rhetoric and discourse, and I earned a minor in environmental studies, graduating in '99. Then I had a bunch of odd jobs, but when we moved to Minneapolis, I started working on my master's in fine arts and creative writing. Once I was able to achieve that, I had enough credit in science from the college, so never underestimate your minor, to at Cordon Bleu, the College of Culinary Arts. I was originally hired to teach environmental science at the Culinary College, which produced associate degree students. And then as they needed extra help, I also relied on my other majors and taught both literature and composition at the college. And then a couple of things happened. The Le Cordon Bleu decided to become a certificate program. We were expecting and having our first daughter. By us, I mean Jessica Fox Wilson and I. And she was then also offered a job at Beloit College. So three things happened all at once, which meant that I was a stay-at-home dad for a while, and then I worked at Beloit College at the Wright Museum of Art for a few years, and then in the Learning Enrichment and Disability Services office at Beloit College. And then how I ended up at Welty is I met Brenda through yoga here in town, and when they were having their director search a couple years ago, I was able to connect with her and interviewed fairly well, enough to get hired. And so then I've been at the Welty Environmental Center for the last 2 years. What I really like about the Environmental Center work is that I get to have all of the fun, dirty science and none of the grading, which is amazing. All right.
Great, thank you. And thank you for uncovering my shameless nepotism. I appreciate that. But you know, it helps, it's networking. So the next thing I want to ask about is the experiences that you've had at Beloit. So all of you had very different majors and very different coursework, but how did your coursework and your experiences at the college help contribute to the type of work that you do today? Erin, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you since I haven't started with you yet.
Oh, sure. I think, you know, outside of academics, I think the experiences that meant the most to me was that I was involved with the Beloit Science Fiction and Fantasy Association. I was a BISFA. I was their vice president and had to organize Dairyland, which was a annual gaming convention. So I learned a lot about working with people that have a lot of different views about how something should happen, and organizing events. You know, that was a lot of fun, and I missed those folks. The other real non-academic experience that I valued a lot was that I was a work study student, and I worked for Commons as a short order cook 3 times a day at sometimes, but I was there a lot. And working with the folks in the food industry really meant a lot to me and helped keep me on track and provide a way for me to organize my day. Now, in terms of academics, you know, I came into Beloit College knowing I wanted a creative writing degree. I wanted to write stories, I wanted to publish books. But I was kind of open for a second major. Back in the 90s, you had to have 2 majors or a major and a couple minors. So I had some playing around to do, but I came across a new faculty member back in the 90s, and I took a science class from that person, and I didn't do so well. And so I decided that I wasn't going to give up. I was going to minor instead of majoring, and I ended up with 2 English majors and a minor. I don't know, I had a lot of fun, but especially with my academic work, but I think it's those extracurricular activities that I still think of more fondly than my academics.
Mm-hmm. Great. I appreciate you bringing up the idea of work study. So we consider at the college work study a part of your professional preparation. And I think even just the skills that you get from there of working with other people can help you become a better worker later on. Amy, how about you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experiences at Beloit, both inside and outside of the classroom?
Yeah, there are so many experiences that apply to my daily job now that I find incredibly useful. One of them is reading a topo map. It was one of the things, I don't know if it was one of Sue's classes or Jim's classes, I don't quite remember. But like learning to read my basic topography map is something I do in like every day in the office now. I have to look at a map, quickly tell which way is up, down, you know, up slope, down slope, calculate slopes, analyze things. So that's just one small example. Also, internships played a huge role in figuring out exactly what I wanted to do. My first year at Beloit, that first summer after my freshman year, I did the Beloit Sustainability Fellows program, which I don't know if it's still going on, but I actually worked with Sue Swanson to develop a rain shed model of campus. So I collected a bunch of different data from across campus. So I collected topographic points, I collected information about what type of surfaces were on campus, I collected downspout points, and I entered it all into GIS. And that was my first like exposure to stormwater as a topic. And now it's what I do as a career. So that was a really defining point at my time at Beloit. And then some other internships that I did that also kind of related to stormwater and that interest in water was the Keck Geology Consortium program. And then also I was an internship with the Powerhouse Project when it was first kind of starting. I was a hydrology intern one summer. So those are some examples of experiences. But yeah, I would just say, like, as a student at Beloit, just try to find what you're passionate and excited about and focus in on that, and your career will happen later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you bringing up your Powerhouse Project. Have you been able to come back and see the Powerhouse yet?
I have not visited
it yet. Well, you're welcome anytime once we're allowing visitors again. So Brenda, how about you? What are some of the experiences that helped shape your career?
Well, again, my experience at Beloit was a little bit different than Erin and Amy's, just because I was coming back to school after having been away. But all of my other higher education experiences had all been at really large schools, either state schools or private, but no school was smaller than about 18 to 20,000 students. So what was so remarkable to me was the amount of attention you got from professors while you were working on projects, and also the range of projects that you could work on. You sort of, if you could think of it and support it with ways that would be executed, you could kind of do not whatever you wanted to come up with, but you could really, really pursue an interest much farther, I think, than you could at a larger school where you didn't have that kind of interaction. So in ways it felt more like a master's program than a BS anyway. And I was able to participate in the Biomedical Scholars Program the 2 summers before I graduated, which was funding to work in a lab outside of Beloit College. And so I went up to Madison for a summer and worked in a genetics lab up there to really get a flavor for research at that level and what lab work would feel like, which again was just an opportunity I was really grateful to be able to take part of. But that's what the Beloit experience to me was just so gratifying, was that ability to pursue things that you sort of started cooking up, and then you met with your professor or your advisor and you could expand it, you could find funding for it. That was a really great part of my time here.
Awesome, great, thank you very much. So this is going to be, just for our listeners, my last question before I open it up for questions. So if you've been thinking about questions, make sure you jot them down. But so tell me a little bit about what surprises you've had in your career that, maybe unexpected experiences, or maybe twists and turns, as Brenda and Erin had shared. And why don't we start, if you don't mind, Brenda, with Brenda.
Sure. Well, my surprise is a little bit of a reiteration of what I said earlier, and it certainly surprises other people. To me, it sort of makes sense if you think about it, but what to me seems kind of nuts is that all of these weird steps and twists and turns along the way all totally make sense to get me where I am right now. Some of that is because when you work at a nonprofit, you sort of have to be a Jack/Jane of all trades and be able to, 1 minute throw together a newsletter and the next minute have a donor phone call and raise funds, and then reach out to a local organization and then help put together a pancake breakfast. And so, you have about, 15 different hats that you slap on during the course of the day. And I've sort of had, I don't know about 15, but I've had all of these different jobs over the last few decades that all of them come to play into where I am right now. I'm sure I wouldn't have predicted that back in the old days in art history. I was very like, oh my, I do the art science, which now is my absolute opposite attitude towards all of that. But again, you just never know what's going to come up. And it's kind of cool to see how it all comes into play now. None of it's never a waste of time, but it certainly doesn't seem to be now when you see how it all comes into play.
Yeah, I think that sort of retrospect can be really helpful as you sort of shape your career, but it's hard to get when you're a college student. So Erin, how about you? What sort of surprises have you had in your career?
I just want to sort of reiterate with what Brenda has said, in that all of the skills that I've been gaining from past jobs have come into play in this one. And I kind of like to think about that as the unicorn effect, where you have to have a little bit of everything to be able to make it work. And so I do sales, which I was in retail for a long time, working in bookstores, and I worked in a customer service department for a publishing company. And so those sales techniques really come in handy. I've been managing people, so I manage volunteers now and a staff member. Teaching, so I was a substitute teacher for a while, and just lots and lots of different things in my past now I pull on to be able to do.
Excuse me.
We'll let that take a moment here, and then we'll get back there. Okay, so so I think that it's surprising to know that I really need all of those things. I think, when I was just starting out, once in 1999, when I graduated, I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a job that lets me write and publish stories. And so I spent a lot of time doing some really crappy jobs, including the first job that I ever got out of college was a file clerk on the Loop in Chicago. And I didn't do very well at that at all. I was not fast enough at filing. And so I was let go in the first 4 weeks. So my first job, I was fired from out of college. And then I, worked at art stores and things like that because I really wanted to take time and try to write books. But, and so the surprise is that, I've written a few books, and I prefer actually working outside my hands than stuck in a room on a keyboard.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing up that first job experience, because sometimes college students don't recognize the importance of failure. And I think failure can be a really good learning experience as well as the successes you've had. So Amy, how about you? What sort of surprises have you had in your career?
I think one of the biggest surprises is just thinking about the work I do now, and it is not work that I would have expected that I would do when I was at Beloit. So for example, I work for a city, and I handle things like I inspect construction sites. I work in the engineering department. I do engineering plan reviews. I don't have an engineering degree. I have a geology degree. So it's just things like unexpected ways to move forward in your career. So my background is perfect for the position that I'm in, but it isn't the same background that most of my coworkers have. And so that's really interesting. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you're a student, is your degree doesn't really matter in the end. It's more the experiences that you've built and, the things that you can do and you can offer, not a degree or a word by your name or anything like that. So those are some of the surprises that I've had.
Great, thank you. And I think when I counsel students on how to best prepare themselves, I often have talked to them about how that name of the degree isn't as important as what you've done. So I appreciate you emphasizing that. So we have some time for questions from our listeners here. And so does anybody have a question? And you can either raise your hand or do a little wave or unmute yourself and ask. So it looks like I have one question. So I'm going to unmute you, your Emmy. Go ahead.
Hi. So I'm about to be a graduate, and well, the job market's pretty weird right now, but I'm wondering if you would disadvise getting like a service job just to start saving money and getting yourself established as a human post-college. Because right now there's not a whole lot of environmentally focused jobs available in Chicago, where I am. So
That's a great question. What do you guys think?
Well, I can start. I would absolutely, because any work is going to provide you something in addition to some money, but because you just never know. And like I had said, my moving into the world of costume design would absolutely not have happened if I hadn't been working at a fabric store. I had just moved to Austin. I didn't really know what to do with myself at that point, and I could sew, so I got a job in a fabric store, which back in those days there was more of them than there were now, and met this costume designer who was shopping there, and I was just like, that's a job? And I quizzed her about it, and oh my God, there's even a academic process for this, and it totally was because I was just doing this retail gig, minimum wage job to keep myself out of trouble. So yes, do it. You never know who you're going to meet or what something is going to get unturned while you do that.
Yeah. Anybody else have an opinion on that, Amy or Erin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really challenging. I mean, I can't even imagine what you're probably going through right now, about to graduate, and people are getting laid off right and left. Everyone is working from home. It's a really challenging situation. So I'd say, yeah, absolutely get whatever job you can. And I guess what I would recommend is, I mean, maybe not in the immediate present, but try to find ways, if you want to pursue science or sustainability or an environmental field, find ways to volunteer or get involved in that type of work, as you're working full or part-time in a retail setting, if, that's the direction you want to go.
Absolutely. Erin, what do you think?
I think that if you can find something that isn't completely soul crushing, I would go for it. Like after I lost my first job out of college, I spent 3 months unemployed, and I still had to pay rent, so I looked at my budget and realized that I could afford a large sack of dehydrated beans. So I bought that large sack of beans, and I did my best for the foreseeable future, not knowing where my next job was going to come from. But I continued to pay rent. And then I found a job working at a local art store, training art and selling supplies, as well as another job working at a movie theater. And so by the day I was at an art store, and at night I worked at a movie theater. Those just pay the bills. It doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do forever. It just means that that's what you're doing to be responsible, pay your bills, and still. I mean, that's mostly what being an adult is, or being after college, is paying your bills. So find a way to do that without completely, letting it suck the soul out of you. Find other ways to do what you love. Maybe find a job and then volunteer for an organization like us and gain experience in your field.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. So
Are there any other questions out there?
Yeah, so we do have another question. So why don't we unmute? This is for Margaret. Go ahead.
So I'm not going to be graduating anytime soon. I'm still freshman, but I'm minoring in geology and majoring in theater. So I'm just, kind of wondering, since I'm not really planning on, actually going into the field of geology, what can I really do with, that degree if I'm going into the field of theater?
Mm-hmm. I would say, first of all, this is like the perfect panel for you. So Amy, why don't we start with you? Since you majored in geology, what do you see as some of the things that you can use in that major kind of in the working world?
Yeah, so I'd say like the biggest fields that as a geology student you can enter into are oil and gas, environmental consulting, and mining. Those are like the big three, but they are by no means the only things you can do. So I work with water and hydrology, but at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, a lot of my coworkers were either geology, had a geology degree, a biology degree, environmental studies, or just like other random degrees like political science. So it's not like a limiting factor, but if it's not something that you're interested in pursuing in a career, you by no means have to major in it either, I guess.
Okay, great. So let's check. Are there any other questions from folks out there?
There isn't an immediate question. I have something else I want to say to Margaret's question, just
sure.
in the intersection of science and art, because I feel like that has been one of the things that has been very interesting to me, is how those two worlds play off of each other and really aren't as separate as you might think. And one big area of that is just allowing your creativity to flow in both of them. Well, I certainly did back in the day, was sort of like, well, scientists are all serious and facts and data and da-da-da, but there's so much creativity involved in designing experiments and thinking about what area, your field area you're going to study and the questions you're going to ask. And obviously, and I was working in design rather than, well, I don't know if you're doing performance or design, but my area of focus was design. So there was a lot of the same kind of thinking around a question, like, there's a straightforward way to approach a play, but then you start to go, what if we set it 3 centuries earlier? What if we set it 3 centuries later? What if the main male character is now a female? What if, whatever. You start to ask yourself all of these questions to sort of discover a new way of understanding the play, the text, or the project. And the same thing happens in science as well. You start asking these questions of the problem to kind of discover how you're going to investigate it. And so A, never say never, because you just never know. But B, kind of let the things that you love about the one inform the way the other one resonates you, because it totally works. They totally go back and forth. And that's always, it surprised me at first, and now it just completely makes sense now that I've been at it for a little while. So, but I love to hear that. I love to hear that combination, because I just feel like, you're opening yourself up to both great worlds, and you just never know. So good for you. Awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up kind of a really good point about how a liberal arts education doesn't just prepare you for a topic, but it prepares you for a way of thinking. And a lot of times employers are really pleased with that way of thinking, rather than, as Amy was saying, like that name next to your full name, but just I was a geology major, I was a creative writing major, but instead, what is it about you and the way that you think that can be really important? So other folks who might have questions, you can just feel free to raise your hand or do a little wave. So if we don't have one, then I've got another one for you. So one of the things that we're emphasizing at the college, as I was talking about those ways of thinking, are integrated learning outcomes, where we think that these are the things that employers really like to have. So people who are effective communicators, creative problem solvers, productive collaborators, and that are professionally and intellectually agile. thinking about those qualities, are there any one that really has helped you in your career? And if you could tell us a little bit about that. Erin, why don't we start with you? And then he makes his angry face.
I don't know about angry face. I think that I use all of those things all the time. The creativity, I think, is the one that I like the most. I have and this is where I think, Margaret, where theater and geology could really come into play well together. It's that, you know, I've got a bunch of kids, and I'm given a scientific standard by either the national standards or one of the Wisconsin standards that I have to be able to communicate to a certain age group. So how do you go about doing that? For example, you know, how do you teach you know, the scientific method to a bunch of third graders? And so, like, you know, what do you do? As you know, you break it down into pieces, and you start with, well, you have to ask a question. You know, how does the color of snakes provide, you know, their adaptation of color provide them, will help them survive? And, you know, if you have that question, you know, how does color help? Then you can devise a game, and I play a game with the kids where they have to find different colors of yarn in the grass, and then we determine, you know, how many we found, and make a pie chart, and to determine which adaptation is the best. And so, you know, just being able to, you know, have a small little, like, I have to meet this standard, how are we going to do it, and then try to come up with a game. So creativity, I think, is, and problem solving like that has been most helpful for me.
Awesome. I might come back to that question a bit, but I know that Coco had a question. So Coco, I'm just going to unmute you here. What was your question?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't find the raise hand thing before.
That's okay.
But I just had a question specifically for Amy, just because I'm kind of curious about, I think you had mentioned saying that you worked as a corporate environmental consultant. And I'm a computer science major with a large interest in environmental stuff, but I'm anticipating that I might end up in some sort of more corporate job, or maybe a job that doesn't align as much with what I want to do, or what even maybe my morals are. And I'm curious to, like, what your experience was in a company like that, and I guess how you navigated that.
Yeah, I would say the first thing I want to point out is not all environmental consultants are the same. There are wonderful environmental consulting companies, and I have friends who work at them, and they love their jobs. The company I worked for in particular, I didn't like the work environment I was in, and I didn't like the amount of travel that I had. So those were my main problems. But it really depends on the department and the company. So certain companies are like, they just have a reputation of being like, we protect the environment. And then other companies may have kind of the reputation of, we protect our clients and their pollution. So I think you just need to be careful. And as a first job, I wouldn't worry about it. Like, any place will give you, any environmental consulting company would give you great experience. But it just might be something that, you know, you work towards working for a particular company, or it's really all about the people that you work with too. So if you like your close coworkers, a job is going to be fun. And if you know, really dislike someone, or you don't like your boss, it's going to be really challenging no matter where you work. So I think it's almost more about the people you work with than the place. and just finding a group of people that you work well with. But so one of our biggest clients was Walmart. We also worked for Target, PepsiCo, Magellan, which is a big oil pipeline company or oil processing company. So we worked for very corporate clients, and a lot of the work I did was protecting the environment, and I didn't feel guilty about that. It just, I really didn't like the amount of travel. That was the biggest thing for me.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for that answer. Are there other folks that have questions? Okay. Not seeing one right now. So I'll get back to that other question around kind of the skills that you use on a daily basis. So Erin had mentioned his creative problem solving. Brenda, I'm going to turn to you if you don't mind. What sort of skills do you use in your job, and how does that help contribute to the work that you do?
Well, what I was thinking sort of in response to the question was kind of when you, especially as you start a job search, is to take a really high level look at your skill set, because even if it seems like it's very specific and kind of into the weeds in your subject area, it may be something that actually translates very nicely into another job. And so an example of that, and again, this was one of those weird science theater world overlaps. To me, a costume shop operates very similarly to a lab. You have a group of people all working towards the same goal, but each person has a slightly different role in reaching that goal. And it's a lot of project management. So here's where we're starting. Here's all the things that have to happen. There's a deadline. You know, so much has to happen before the next batch of things need to happen. And so actually, when I was interviewing for the job at Carey and I was all ready to roll out my science degree and my statistics creds and all that, they really wanted to hear about the opera's Japan tour in 2002, when we took, 3 operas and 500 singers to Japan, and I was in charge of organizing the costume world for that. That's what they wanted to talk about. So, and who'd have thunk, but, it was the same thing. I could show that I could follow a timeline and think through the steps that had to happen. And so I think taking a really high look at what you are good at, what you like to do, but what you've also kind of developed skills for, and think like, how would you describe that in a different situation is really helpful moving forward. So again, there's lots of stuff I do at Welty that I wouldn't have really thought I needed to know. I mean, I started way back a million years ago as a journalism major, and I write all the time now. I write press releases, I do emails to donors, I do blog posts for our website, like all this writing. And I'm pulling out all those old journalism tricks that I learned, back in the day on a typewriter, no less. But, you just never know what's going to come circle back again. So think of it, a little less specifically to see how it might apply.
Awesome. I'll follow up with you, Amy. So what kinds of skills do you use, kind of what we would call like transferable skills or learning skills that do you use in your work?
Absolutely. Well, all of them that you listed are skills I use. But so I work in an engineering department, and engineers are notorious for not being creative. So I like to think that I add a little flair of creativity to that group. But I'd say probably the most important skill that has kind of run across all of the positions I've had is communication. Communication is everything, no matter, basically, no matter what job you have, you're going to have to communicate. And how you communicate and how well you are adapting to other people's communication styles is really important. So in my current position, I'm talking every day with developers, contractors and construction workers, residents, sometimes city council members, commissioners, and watershed district staff. So knowing how to communicate to different audiences is extremely important. And then also understanding email communication versus phone or in-person communication preferences, and really adapting your style to meet other people's, I think can go a long way in helping you develop relationships and moving forward at work.
I think that that's a really good point about how to succeed well in a work environment, is that being able to work with others. And that's a learned skill that you can get in a lot of different ways, not just through a classroom. So I wanted to check and see if there were other questions that folks had. Okay, so seeing none, then I have one last wrap-up question, and then we'll check one more time if you have other questions. So obviously you're talking to a bunch of college students. So if you could give a piece of advice to college students about gaining experience in the sustainability field or working in the type of field that you work in, what would that piece of advice be? And why don't we start with Amy, if that's okay?
Yeah. I guess I'd just be like, follow your heart. And if you're passionate about sustainability, just do it. I mean, I don't know, just do what makes you happy. Obviously you need to eat and you need to pay your bills and rent, but you know, just try to find things that make you happy, both in school and then after school. I have found that things have just worked out. Like I have been unemployed, and I've also applied for lots and lots of jobs and not gotten any of them. And then the perfect job appears. So I kind of feel like it's gonna happen. You might have to wait it out, especially in current times, but like everything will work out if you just know what you like doing and just follow that.
Great, thank you, Amy. I'll turn to Brenda next. So Brenda, piece of advice for college students.
Okay. Mine is more specific, although yes, very much at the top, follow your heart, whether it's a person or a subject matter. Because I will say some of my best career moves were following a certain geology professor around, and I made it work. So there's no, maybe that's my thing, is like, there's no shame in that. If there is someone who you connect with on a level that makes you willing to let their decisions help you make your decisions, that's totally cool. In one way, it helps narrow the field a little bit, so you don't have like, oh my God, there's so much stuff to do. It's like, well, we both have to go here because there's something, you know, for one person, I'll make it work. But having a partner in crime is not something to use that as part of your decision-making process. It's okay. I mean, you know, parents may be like, oh, I don't know. But again, you're the one who's having to live that life. And like I said, it's worked really well for me every single time that I've made that choice. And I don't feel like I've compromised my standards or my goals or my wishes for what I want to do with my life. And it's worked out very well for me. And so I wish it for you, but I also, you know, give yourself permission to let your heart dictate some of the choices.
That's a great answer. Awesome. Erin, how about you?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you are in your stage. If you're just starting out as a college student, you know, allow yourself the ability to take a few classes outside of your immediate field of interest, and see where those take you. You know, I started Welty College with the mindset I was going to major in creative writing and literature, and I knew that I still wanted to do something on the environmental side of things. I just didn't really allow myself enough space to really do creative writing and a science major at some point. So really, you know, allow yourself to the space to experiment with classes. Also, I really recommend making connections while you're at college with other students. You know, join a couple of clubs, get involved with other students, and see what they're doing. Some of my favorite experiences are at clubs with at Welty College, and just make time for connections and building your new Beloit College family.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much. So we're heading at the end, and I'm seeing that some people are popping out as they need to head to other responsibilities. So I wanted to check one more time if there were any questions from our remaining people. It doesn't look like there are. So I want to thank our panelists, Erin and Amy and Brenda, for taking time out of their days in their respective spaces to come and talk with us. And then I'll just put in a plug for Welty, since again, shameless nepotism. If you are in Beloit College, every semester Welty hires interns, and they do a great job of teaching those interns skills that they need, whether it's in grant writing or environmental education. And so I would encourage you to seek them out either for a volunteer opportunity or an internship opportunity. But I want to thank everybody for being here, and I'm going to turn off the recording now. And thank you for your time.